He will do anything on the list, she says. In 6 years, he has never once generated it.
Dear Mia.
Episode 2. The Invisible List.
Mia.
Before we start, one honest thing. I'm not a therapist, and nothing here is a substitute for one. What I am is someone who's spent years writing and living the long, unglamorous middle of marriages, the part after the wedding and before whatever comes next. So take this as one person's honest attempt at an answer, not a professional prescription. Let's get into today's letter.
Dear Mia.
I've started this letter 4 times and deleted it because every version sounds like I'm complaining about nothing, and I promise I know how good I have it compared to a lot of people. My husband is a good man. I want to say that first because I know how this letter is going to sound. He's never once told me the laundry is my job. He does the dishes most nights. He'll take our daughter to her pediatrician appointments if I ask him to. But I'm the one who knows she's due for a pediatrician appointment. I'm the one who knows we're out of the toothpaste she likes, that her shoes don't fit anymore, that the parent-teacher conference is on a Thursday, that his mother's birthday is in 11 days. He'll do anything on the list. He will not, in 6 years, once have generated the list. Last month I had the flu, real flu, the kind where you can't stand up, and I lay in bed running through everything that still had to happen that week like a machine that can't turn off even when it's broken. He kept asking what he could do to help, so sincerely, and I kept not being able to answer, because the help I needed was for him to already know, and I didn't have the energy to explain that the not knowing was the whole problem. He genuinely wanted to help, I could see it on his face, and somehow that made it harder to explain, not easier, because how do you tell someone who's standing right there asking sincerely that the sincerity isn't the part that's missing? I'm not angry at him for any one thing. I'm exhausted by the sum of all of it, and I don't know how to even bring this up without it turning into a fight about something that isn't really about dishes. Okay, first, thank you for the sentence. He will do anything on the list. He will not generate the list, because that is the clearest description of this particular exhaustion I've ever read, and I want to use your own words for the rest of this, because you've already done the hard part of naming it precisely. Here's what I think is actually going on underneath the toothpaste and the shoes and his mother's birthday, and I want to walk through it slowly because I don't think he doesn't help enough quite captures it, and I don't think you think that either, or you wouldn't have opened your letter the way you did. There are 2 entirely different jobs happening in your house, and only one of them is visible. The visible job is the doing, the errand, the appointment, the load of laundry, and he's genuinely present for that one, which is real and worth acknowledging, not as a consolation prize, but because it means this isn't a story about a man who refuses to help. The invisible job is the noticing, the remembering, the anticipating, the holding of 1,000 small facts in your head at once so that nothing falls through, and that job in your house currently has exactly 1 employee. That job doesn't clock out when you have the flu. It doesn't clock out ever because it's not a task, it's a mode of attention, and you can't hand someone your attention the way you can hand them a grocery list, because if you have to write the grocery list, you're still doing the job. This is why he'll do anything I ask doesn't actually solve it, and it's why so many well-meaning men hear, I need more help, and respond by waiting, sincerely, to be asked, not realizing that the asking is itself the labor, and that a marriage where one person always has to ask is not equal just because the answer is always yes. You're not tired because he says no. You're tired because you're the only smoke detector in the house, permanently on, and being the only smoke detector is exhausting even in a house that never catches fire. I want to give this thing a name because I think naming it precisely will help you talk about it without spiraling into a fight about specifics. People who study this, and plenty who've just lived it, call it the mental load, and once you see it named like that, you start noticing it everywhere, not just in your own kitchen. It's the reason a woman can come back from a genuinely relaxing vacation and immediately feel exhausted again within a day, because the trip didn't turn off the background process. It just relocated it to a hotel room, where she was still the one tracking sunscreen and snacks, and whether the toddler skipped a nap. It's the reason just tell me what to do and I'll do it can be a sincerely loving offer, and also, simultaneously, The exact sentence that keeps the load from ever actually moving, because it quietly reconfirms that the tracking stays with you, and only the doing gets redistributed. I bring this up not to make you feel more alone in it, but for the opposite reason. This is such a common, well-documented pattern that it isn't really about your marriage specifically, or about him specifically, or some special failure on either of your parts. It's closer to a default setting that most households fall into without choosing it, and defaults can be changed once you can actually see them, which is exactly what you're doing right now by writing this letter instead of just quietly enduring another 6 years of it. I also want to name something you did in your letter that I don't think was an accident. You opened with, "He's a good man," like a legal disclaimer, like you needed permission from me before you were allowed to be tired. I hear that a lot, from women describing husbands who don't yell, don't cheat, don't disappear to the bar 3 nights a week, decent, present, loving men. And I think that opening line is doing real damage to you that has nothing to do with him. It's teaching you that exhaustion only counts as legitimate if it comes with a villain attached. It doesn't. You can be bone tired from carrying something real in a marriage with someone genuinely good at the exact same time, with no contradiction between those two facts. The goodness of the man does not cancel out the weight of the job. Please stop making him defend his character before you're allowed to describe your fatigue. He's not on trial. The list is. So when you finally sit down to talk to him, I'd actually say that sentence out loud near the start. This isn't about whether you're a good husband. You are. This is about a job in our house that only I know how to see, and I need you to learn to see it too. Naming it that plainly before either of you can slide into old defensive habits tends to change the entire tone of what follows. It's also worth saying, gently, that this isn't really about your husband's individual character, even though it's happening in your individual house. Most of us grow up watching one parent do the noticing and the other parent do the responding, and we absorb which role is ours so early and so thoroughly that neither of you probably ever sat down and agreed to this arrangement. It just assembled itself out of what felt familiar, the way a lot of marriage does in the first few exhausted years before anyone has the bandwidth to examine it. That doesn't make it fair, and it doesn't mean you have to live with it, because it's common. But it does mean you're not dealing with a uniquely broken man. You're dealing with an extremely common blind spot that he likely doesn't even know he has, because nobody ever pointed the camera at it for him the way you're about to. Men who grew up watching their fathers ask what needs doing instead of just knowing very often become husbands who ask the same question with the same sincerity, genuinely unaware that the asking itself is the part that was supposed to change. And I gently point out where this goes if nothing changes, because I don't think you're only describing this month. I think you're describing a shape that repeats. Your daughter is young now. Toothpaste and shoe sizes and pediatrician visits. In a few years it'll be which teacher she's struggling with, and whether the friend group turned unkind, and who's driving to which practice on which Tuesday. The invisible job doesn't shrink as kids get older. It gets more complicated, and it gets easier to hide, because a 10-year-old's needs are quieter than a toddler's, easier for a busy father to miss entirely without ever feeling like he's missing anything. If the pattern isn't interrupted now, while it's still visible enough to point to, it tends to calcify into something both of you eventually stop noticing. Him because he's genuinely never had to notice, you because after enough years, noticing on top of doing starts to feel like just what marriage is, rather than something you once had a say in. So here's what I'd actually try, and I want to be specific because communicate better isn't advice, it's a wish. Don't start by listing everything you do. You'll both get defensive, him because it'll sound like an accusation, you because saying it out loud will make you angrier, not less. Instead, pick one whole domain, not a task, a domain, something like everything to do with our daughter's health, appointments and growth spurts and what size she's in now, and hand him the entire domain, ownership and all, not just the execution. That means he doesn't ask you when the appointment is. He knows because tracking it is now his job, not a favor he's doing you. This will feel harder for him than doing the dishes because it is harder. It's the actual invisible labor, not the visible kind, and it may go badly at first, a missed thing, a late thing. Let it. Once that first domain is genuinely his, and you've confirmed it by watching a few months pass without you quietly checking behind him, hand over a second one. Maybe it's his own mother's birthday and the gifts and calls that go with staying close to her, something that's arguably even more naturally his to carry than yours in the first place. The goal isn't a 50-50 spreadsheet split down every category by Thursday. It's proof, accumulating slowly, that the noticing itself can live somewhere other than your head. The alternative, you quietly reabsorbing it because it's faster than watching him fail at it, is the exact trap you're already exhausted from. I'd also think carefully about which domain you hand over first, because the choice matters more than it seems like it should. Pick something with a natural rhythm to it. Pediatric appointments happen on a schedule, so does a school calendar, so does a parent's birthday, rather than something that requires constant low-level vigilance with no clear structure, because a first domain with built-in checkpoints is easier for someone new to the job to succeed at, and an early win matters here. If the first domain he takes on is a diffuse one with no natural markers, it's much easier for both of you to quietly conclude the experiment failed, when really you just handed a beginner the hardest possible assignment. Start him on something closer to training wheels. The harder, more ambient domains, the kind of thing where you just sense, without any calendar telling you, that your daughter's been quieter than usual lately, or that her shoes look tight. Those can come later, once the easier, more scheduled ones have actually stuck. I also want to address something you didn't say directly, but that I suspect is somewhere in the back of your mind, because it comes up in almost every version of this letter I get. What if he takes over a domain and does it badly on purpose? Not because he genuinely doesn't know how, but because doing it badly gets him released from the job faster than doing it well would. That's a real thing, and it has a name too. Sometimes people call it weaponized incompetence, and it's worth being able to tell it apart from honest unfamiliarity, because they call for different responses. Honest unfamiliarity looks like effort with mistakes in it. He tries to track the appointment, gets the date slightly wrong, feels bad about it, tries harder next time. Weaponized incompetence looks like mistakes without effort behind them. He forgets in a way that conveniently always results in you stepping back in, and he doesn't seem to mind the outcome much, because the outcome was always the point. If you start to suspect it's the second thing, that's worth naming directly and separately from everything else in this letter, because it's not actually a mental load problem at that point. It's a different, more pointed conversation about whether he's willing to be a full partner at all, but I'd give him the benefit of the doubt first, because in my experience, genuine unfamiliarity is far more common than deliberate sabotage. And assuming the worst too early can poison a conversation that would otherwise have gone fine. And separately from the logistics, tell him about the flu. Not as evidence in an argument, just as the true story, that you lay there unable to answer, "What can I help with?" because the help you needed was a kind he didn't know how to offer yet. Good men can carry real weight once they understand what it actually is. Most of them have simply never been shown the invisible half of the job because it was never handed to them whole. You're not asking him to become someone else. You're asking him to take over hiring for a position that's had exactly one applicant for 6 years. I want to say something about timing too, because I think you're waiting for the right moment the same way you've been waiting for him to notice the toothpaste, and both of those waits tend to go on forever. There is no calm, well-rested, perfectly worded version of this conversation coming. You will not wake up one Tuesday with enough spare energy to explain 6 years of accumulated exhaustion clearly and without any edge in your voice. That day isn't coming because the exhaustion itself is what's supposed to be the evidence, not an obstacle to presenting the evidence well. So have the conversation a little tired. Have it a little sharper than you'd like. Let it be imperfect. A slightly clumsy conversation that actually happens will do more for this marriage than the flawless one you keep rehearsing in the shower and never delivering. If it helps to have an actual opening line rather than staring at a blank space where the conversation is supposed to start, I'd try something close to this. I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen for a minute before you respond, because if you jump straight to fixing it, I'm going to feel like you didn't hear the part that matters. That single request, just listen first, does a lot of work because a lot of good men, faced with a tired wife describing exhaustion, reflexively want to solve it in real time, offer to do a specific task right then, and that impulse, however loving, can actually short-circuit the conversation before you've said the whole thing. You're not looking for him to fix Tuesday. You're looking for him to understand a 6-year pattern, and that requires him to sit in the discomfort of hearing it fully before he's allowed to reach for a solution. I'd also brace yourself gently for the possibility that his first reaction isn't graceful. Some men hear, "I've been carrying something invisible for 6 years," and receive it, however unfairly, as "You've been secretly resentful for 6 years and never told me," which can land as a betrayal of its own, even though that's not remotely what you're saying. If that happens, try not to escalate into defending your 6 years of silence. Instead, name the gap plainly. You didn't say anything sooner because the whole problem was that you didn't know how to describe something that had no clear edges, no single incident to point to, just an accumulation, and that you're saying it now imperfectly because you finally found the words, not because you were hiding something from him on purpose. Most defensiveness in these conversations isn't cruelty. It's surprise wearing cruelty's clothes for the first few minutes, and it tends to soften once the surprise wears off, if you can both stay in the room long enough for that to happen. One more thing, because I think it'll happen and I don't want it to blindside you. The first time he genuinely forgets something in his new domain, misses the appointment, doesn't notice the outgrown shoes, you're going to feel a very strong urge to step in, quietly before it becomes a problem, the way you've been doing for 6 years. I want you to notice that urge and not act on it, at least not right away. Let the appointment get missed and rescheduled. Let him be the one who has to call and explain. That's not cruelty, and it's not punishment. It's the only way the domain actually becomes his, because right now the two of you have an unspoken agreement where he gets to be slightly unreliable in a job that was never really his, because you'll always catch it before it costs anything. Take away the safety net, and the job either gets learned properly, or the two of you finally have the real conversation about why it isn't sticking, and either outcome is more honest than what you have now, which is a good man who believes he's doing his fair share, married to a woman who's quietly exhausted proving otherwise every single day, without saying so. I want to leave you with a longer view of this too, because 6 years of an established pattern doesn't undo itself in one good conversation, however well it goes. Give the whole shift real time, think in months, not weeks, and expect some backsliding along the way. You will probably catch yourself, 3 months from now, quietly checking whether he remembered the dentist before he's even had the chance to remember it himself, out of pure habit, the same way you'd catch yourself reaching for a light switch in a house you no longer live in. That's not failure. That's 6 years of a well-worn groove taking longer to fill in than 6 weeks of good intentions can manage on their own. What matters is the direction, not the speed. Whether, checking back in a year, more of the invisible list lives in his head than used to, even if it's never a perfect 50-50, even if you're still the one who notices first more often than either of you would like. And give yourself permission, in the meantime, to actually rest when a domain genuinely does become his. This is the part 1C women skip most often, and it undoes a lot of the good work. Once he's reliably tracking your daughter's health appointments, let that fact actually lower your load, rather than keeping a shadow version of the tracking running in your head just in case, because that shadow tracking is exhausting in exactly the same way the original job was, and it quietly tells you the handoff never really happened even when it did. If you've genuinely watched a domain hold steady for a few months, believe it. Let it go. That's the whole point of doing this in the first place. Not to prove a point, not to win an argument about fairness, but to actually get some of your own mind back. That's this week's letter.
I've Mia. Talk soon.